Ella stood just outside the grand hall where the wedding was unfolding, a place that was supposed to be filled with laughter and joy, yet her chest felt heavy like she was carrying a secret too large to bear. Her brother was inside, surrounded by friends and family, their smiles wide, their eyes shining with hope and love, but Ella's gaze was fixed on the small device in her hand. The encrypted message had arrived at the exact moment the ceremony began, and it was urgent enough to pull her away from something she never imagined she would miss. Her fingers trembled as she glanced one last time toward the golden doors behind which her family celebrated the union of two souls meant to be together. For years she had dreamed of this day, planning her speech, imagining the perfect dress and the warm embrace of her brother when he finally said his vows. But now those dreams were fading fast, replaced by a cold reality that demanded her attention. The message was brief, but clear. Location: a derelict warehouse on the edge of the city, and the mission simple yet dangerous. She had to retrieve an item critical to national security, something that could not fall into the wrong hands. The irony of skipping her brother's wedding, for such a mission was not lost on her, but duty had always been her guiding star, and tonight was no different. Ella's mind raced with questions. Who had sent the message? What was the item? Why now? She shoved the phone into her pocket and pulled, her jacket tighter around her slender frame. The cool night air bit at her skin, but she welcomed the chill. It kept her alert and focused. On the other side of the street, she spotted a sleek black car idling its engine, humming softly like a predator, waiting to strike. She moved swiftly, crossing the street with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement as the city lights flickered above her. A flash of movement caught her eye, and she paused, heart hammering against her ribs. A shadow slipped behind a stack of crates, and for a moment she thought she had been spotted. But then the figure vanished into the darkness. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking skeleton of rusted metal and broken windows. Its emptiness swallowed the faint sound of the city, making her steps echo like a warning. She took a deep breath, forcing calm into her veins, and pressed forward. The entrance was unlocked, a small mercy that made her wonder if someone else knew she would be coming. Inside, the air was thick, with dust and the scent of forgotten things. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing scattered papers, old machinery, and the faint outline of footprints on the floor. The footprints were fresh and led deeper into the maze of corridors and shadowed rooms. Ella's grip tightened around her weapon as she followed the trail, each step bringing her closer to the unknown. A sudden noise behind her made her spin around, but only a rat scurried away into a crack in the wall. The adrenaline surged, and she whispered a silent prayer for the strength to finish what she started. The mission was bigger than her fears, bigger than the wedding she had left behind. And as much as she longed to be with her family, she knew this was where she was meant to be. Her radio crackled softly, and a familiar voice came through a whisper of reassurance and urgency. It was her partner Liam telling her to be careful, that the intel had changed, and the operation was no longer just a retrieval, but a rescue. Ella's breath hitched as the stakes rose higher than ever. She wasn't just there to get an object, she had to save someone, and time was running out. Every creak and whisper of the warehouse seemed louder now, a symphony of danger that pressed in on her from all sides. She moved with deliberate caution, knowing that one wrong step could shatter everything. The cold metal of the crate she leaned against bit into her skin, but she welcomed the pain. It kept her grounded. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught her eye from the far corner of the room. She froze, heart pounding, trying to discern whether it was friend or foe. The shadows shifted, and a figure emerged, stepping into the weak light. A man, his face obscured by a hood, raised his hands, slowly signaling he meant no harm. But Ella wasn't convinced. The man's voice was low and urgent, telling her that the situation was worse than she imagined, that the soldiers were closer, and that the wedding was no longer safe. Ella's mind reeled with the implications. The joyous celebration she had abandoned was now a potential battlefield, and the ties that bound her family could be broken by forces beyond their control. She had to make a choice to trust this stranger, or to rely solely on the mission briefing that had brought her here. The seconds stretched into eternity as she weighed her options, and then the sound of distant sirens cut through the night like a warning shot. The enemy was closing in, and there was no turning back. Ella nodded sharply, signaling she was ready to move forward, but her heart clenched with the knowledge that every step took her further from the life she once knew and closer to a danger that threatened to consume everything she loved. She slipped past the man and deeper into the warehouse, the shadows swallowing her whole as the night whispered secrets she was only beginning to understand. Ella's footsteps echoed down the narrow alleyways that twisted like veins through the city streets. The night wrapped around her like a shroud, cold and unyielding as she pressed forward, clutching the small device that buzzed softly in her pocket. A map had appeared on the screen, directing her deeper into a part of the city she rarely visited, the forgotten edge where danger was as common as the flickering streetlights. Every shadow seemed to watch her, every breath felt heavy as if the night itself held its breath waiting for what would come next. She moved with purpose, but a growing unease gnawed at the edges of her mind. What was this item so important that it had pulled her from her brother's wedding on the most important day of his life? The sound of distant voices made her freeze a moment too long, and her heart slammed in her chest like a drumbeat of warning. Suddenly, footsteps behind her, quick and deliberate. She spun around but only saw empty streetlights casting, long twisted shadows. The city was playing tricks, or was someone following her? Her hand instinctively went to the gun concealed beneath her jacket. The cold metal was a small comfort in a world suddenly full of threats. She moved faster, weaving through narrow passageways, her mind racing to anticipate every possible danger. Ahead, the warehouse from the message loomed like a dark beast waiting to devour her. She approached with caution. The door creaked open, revealing a cavernous interior, filled with crates and shadows. The silence was thick and oppressive, like the air was holding secrets too terrible to speak aloud. Ella's flashlight pierced the darkness, revealing a narrow path marked by faint scuff marks on the dusty floor. She followed the trail deeper into the bowels of the building, her senses sharp and every nerve on edge. Suddenly, a faint voice whispered through her earpiece, a crackling message from Liam, his tone urgent and tense, warning her that the enemy was closer. Then they thought that this mission had become a race against time. Ella swallowed hard, knowing that failure was not an option. Her steps faltered as she came face to face with a locked metal door. Its cold surface gleamed under the flashlight beam. The code she had been given was supposed to open it, but as she worked, her fingers stumbled over the keypad. Something was wrong. The lock beeped an angry warning, and she cursed under her breath, knowing that someone else had tampered with it. A noise behind her made her whirl around, just a rat scurrying across the floor. But the fear it ignited stayed with her like a shadow. The warehouse felt alive with danger, waiting to strike. She took a deep breath and tried to calm the storm inside her chest. The mission was no longer just about the retrieval of an item. It was about survival. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. A man tall and lean, his face obscured by a hood. His voice was low and urgent, warning her that the soldiers were moving in, that the wedding was compromised, and that she needed to leave before it was too late. Ella's mind spun with disbelief. The joyous celebration she had left behind was now a battlefield, and her family's safety was at risk. She hesitated, torn between duty and love. The man's eyes were pleading, urging her to trust him, but the years of training told her to be cautious, to question, to survive. The sound of approaching footsteps shattered the moment, and she ducked behind a crate heart, pounding as armed men stormed through the entrance, their faces grim and weapons raised. Ella's breath caught in her throat as she watched the soldiers sweep through the warehouse, searching for something or someone. She pressed herself into the shadows, her body trembling with the effort to remain unseen. The radio in her pocket crackled to life, Liam's voice urgent, instructing her to abort the mission and regroup, but Ella knew that abandoning now would mean losing everything with no other choice. She slipped past the soldiers, moving silently like a ghost through the maze of crates and broken machinery. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. She could feel the weight of the wedding she had left behind pressing on. Her heart, the faces of her family flashing through her mind, reminding her what was at stake. Suddenly, a sharp pain exploded in her side, a bullet grazing her skin, but the shock propelled her forward. She stumbled through a doorway into a narrow corridor, closing it behind her and pressing her back against the cold wall. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself. The mission had become a desperate fight to stay alive. Her phone buzzed with a new message, a location coordinates, and a warning. The extraction point was compromised, and she had to find another way out. The night was closing in like a trap, and the danger was far from over. Ella's resolve hardened. She would not let the mission fail or her family be destroyed as she moved cautiously down the corridor. A distant explosion shook the building, sending dust and debris raining down. The sound of screams and chaos filled the air. The wedding had become a war zone, and Ella was caught in the middle of a nightmare that had no clear end. Her eyes burned with tears. She refused to let fall. She reached a stairwell leading to the roof, the only possible escape. She climbed quickly, ignoring the burning in her legs and the pounding in her chest. The cold wind hit her like a slap as she burst onto the rooftop. The city stretched out beneath her, dark and indifferent. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the shadows. A voice whispered her name. Liam. His face was grim, but relief flooded her as she realized she was not alone. Together, they would face whatever horrors awaited below, knowing that the night was far from over and the true battle was just beginning. Back at the grand hall, the sounds of celebration had been replaced by an eerie silence. The golden decorations that once sparkled now seemed dull and lifeless. The guests stood frozen in place, whispers rippling through the crowd like a cold wind. The air thick with confusion and fear as the heavy footsteps grew louder and heavier, echoing through the marble halls. The massive doors slammed open, revealing armed soldiers in dark uniforms, their faces grim and eyes scanning the crowd for something unseen. Their weapons were raised with practiced precision, and the sound of orders barked in low voices sent shivers through everyone present. The joyous chatter turned into frightened murmurs, and all eyes locked on the intruders, searching for answers that would not come. Ella's brother James stood at the altar frozen, mid-smile, his bride clutching his arm as if holding on to a fragile thread of hope. The sight of the soldiers crashing their perfect day shattered the fragile bubble of happiness, leaving behind shards of shock and disbelief. Mothers covered their mouths, gasping. Fathers clenched fists in anger, and children hid behind trembling hands. The lead officer's voice cut through the panic, commanding everyone to remain calm, but his tone betrayed the urgency of the situation. His gaze swept the room, searching for a particular face or item. The wedding photographer dropped his camera, stunned, unable to capture this moment that no one would forget. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of sirens growing closer. In the back of the hall, a waiter spilled a tray of glasses. their shards tinkling like broken promises across the polished floor. The tension coiled tighter with each passing second, and then a sudden crash of a window shattered the moment, throwing shards of glass into the air like frozen rain. Panic erupted as guests scrambled for cover, but the soldiers quickly formed a protective line, shielding those who could not escape. Meanwhile, Ella's mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination. Her radio buzzed urgently. Liam's voice was steady but strained, urging her to hurry. The situation at the wedding had escalated beyond anything they had anticipated. She clenched her fists, knowing that every second lost could cost lives, and the secret she was sent to recover was still out there somewhere, hidden and vulnerable. The soldiers moved with precision, their eyes sharp, scanning every corner, searching for threats or clues. Ella's heart hammered against her ribs as she remembered the stranger's warning that the wedding was no longer safe, that the enemy was inside and the celebration was a cover for something far darker. The line between friend and foe blurred as suspicion poisoned the air. James tried to calm his family, his voice steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm raging inside. He glanced toward the back entrance where the first signs of the intrusion had appeared and wondered if Ella was safe, if she had even made it to the mission, or if the nightmare unfolding around him was connected to the choice she had made. Suddenly, a figure burst through the crowd, a man running wild eyes, frantic, shouting warnings that the soldiers were not here to protect but to capture. Someone important was being held hostage. The item Ella sought was part of a much larger conspiracy, and the wedding was the stage for a dangerous game where no one was safe. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the soldiers tightened their formation. Their leader barked orders to secure the exits and search for the hostage. The atmosphere was thick with tension as alliances shifted and the guests became unwilling players in a deadly chess match. The clock was ticking, and every heartbeat carried the weight of unknown consequences. At that moment, a piercing scream echoed from the upper balcony, drawing all eyes upward. The bride's sister collapsed, clutching her chest and pointing toward a shadowy figure disappearing into the maze of corridors. The soldiers pursued, but the labyrinth of the building swallowed the intruder, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread. Ella moved silently through the hidden passages beneath the hall, her breath shallow and mind razor-sharp. She knew the stakes were higher than ever, and the secrets buried in the wedding's heart were about to explode into a chaos no one could have foreseen. Her radio whispered Liam's voice, guiding her toward a hidden chamber where the truth awaited. Every step was a dance with danger as she navigated the darkness, the cold stone walls closing in around her like the grip of fate. She felt the weight of her absence at the wedding, the love she left behind mingling with the fear that threatened to consume. Her A choice had been made, and now there was no turning back as she reached the chamber door. Her hand trembled over the handle, a surge of cold fear and fierce resolve battling within her. The soldier's presence above was a reminder that time was running out, and the secret she was about to uncover would change everything forever. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door into the unknown. Ella's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light of the hidden chamber, a room forgotten by time, dust particles dancing like ghosts in the stale air. The walls were lined with old filing cabinets, rusted locks, and torn papers scattered across the floor. A single table stood in the center, cluttered with documents, maps, and a small metallic case that hummed faintly as if alive with secrets. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the case, the cold metal biting into her skin. A soft beep escaped the device, and a holographic image flickered to life above it, revealing a series of coded messages, and images too complex for anyone but her to decipher. Her breath caught in her throat, realizing that this was the key, the item that had drawn her away from the wedding and into this nightmare. Suddenly, the radio crackled sharply, Liam's voice. Urgent, almost desperate warning that the soldiers were breaching the chamber's outer doors. The operation had been compromised, and extraction was no longer an option. Ella's mind raced with possibilities. The people behind this plot were closer than ever. And the wedding was just the beginning of something far darker. She grabbed the case, tucking it securely under her arm, and scanned the room for an escape route. Her eyes landed on a narrow ventilation shaft, partially hidden behind a stack of crates. The opening was small, but it was her only chance. She crouched low and forced herself inside the tight space, the cold metal scraping against her skin as she inched forward, the faint sound of shouting growing louder behind her. The tunnel twisted and turned like a serpent, leading her deep beneath the building. Each breath was a struggle, the confined space pressing against her like a weight. She pushed on, driven by the thought of her family and the mission that now meant more than ever. She had to get out alive and reveal the truth before it was too late. Back above the wedding hall, chaos reigned. The soldiers had taken control, securing the exits and rounding up the guests, but fear and suspicion hung thick in the air. The bride's family huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide with disbelief. The man who had warned of the hostage was now in custody, questioned fiercely, but revealing nothing, only cryptic warnings of a plan unfolding beyond their understanding. James refused to leave his side, the bond of brotherhood stronger than fear. He scanned the room, desperate to find Ella among the crowd or in the chaos, but she was nowhere to be seen. Every moment away from her was a torment, a silent plea for her safety, and for the nightmare to end. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the building, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling, and the lights flickered wildly. Panic surged through the crowd as screams echoed down the halls, and the soldiers struggled to maintain order. The enemy was attacking from within, and the wedding had become a battleground no one had prepared for. Ella crawled through the ventilation shaft, her muscles burning her lungs, desperate for air. The radio crackled again, a faint voice urging her to hold on to the coordinates for extraction, but the signal was weak, fading in and out like a lifeline slipping away. She gritted her teeth, refusing to give up, knowing that failure was not an option. Suddenly, the shaft opened into a small room, a forgotten maintenance closet cluttered with tools and spare parts. The door was locked from the outside, but the thin walls offered a moment of respite. Ella pushed herself against the door, listening to the distant sounds of conflict above. Her heart pounded with urgency and hope intertwined like a fragile thread. She opened the metallic case, revealing a small device inside a flash drive containing critical data that could expose the conspiracy behind the attack. The secrets hidden within would shake the very foundation of power and corrupt those who sought to control it. Ella's fingers hovered over the activate button, knowing that once pressed, there would be no turning back. Outside the building, the streets had descended into chaos, the sound of sirens mixed with gunfire and shouting as the city awoke to a nightmare unfolding in the heart of what was meant to be a day of celebration. The media swarmed the area, cameras flashing, capturing every moment of the unfolding drama, and the soldiers fought to contain the threat inside the wedding hall. James made a decision. He could no longer wait. He gathered the remaining family and friends, urging them to stay close and prepare to fight, if necessary. The love that had filled the room moments before was now a fierce determination to survive and protect each other from the unknown enemy. Suddenly, the door to the maintenance closet rattled violently, someone trying to force their way. Ella tensed, ready to defend herself, but before the door could give way, Liam appeared, pulling her out with a forceful grip. His face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but relief flooded her as she saw him alive. Together, they sprinted through hidden corridors, dodging soldiers and intruders alike, their breaths ragged and hearts pounding with desperation. They burst out into the cool night air, the cityscape stretching before them, dark and dangerous but alive. With possibility, Ella clutched the flash drive tightly, knowing that their escape was just the beginning of a fight that would reach far beyond the wedding and the secrets buried beneath its walls. Liam glanced at her, his eyes fierce and determined. They were no longer just operatives, on a mission. They were survivors, guardians of a truth that could topple empires and change lives forever. The world had shifted beneath their feet, and there was no turning back. As they disappeared into the shadows of the city, the distant sound of helicopters and sirens filled the sky. The wedding was lost to chaos, but the story was far from over. Ella's sacrifice had ignited a spark, and the night whispered promises of battles yet to come and a truth waiting to be unveiled.